What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are focusing on getting all of our accessories mounted on to the engine. Now that includes water pump, alternator, AC compressor, and a couple other things, even one K-tuned piece, which is going to look super solid once it's mounted on here. Then we're going to get our main crankshaft pulley bolted on, and we'll see if we can't throw the belt on, and then that'll be pretty much all of the accessories handled. So let's jump right into it. Now, the first thing that we're going to need to do is to get our water pump mounted, and that is because most of the other accessories actually bolt onto that. So let's get that handled first, and I'll show you guys a little bit of what the block looks like where the gasket normally would be, and how I've cleaned it up and everything. And I actually have a different water pump from the stock one, and I'll explain that right now. Here we have the intake side of the engine. This is where all of the accessories are going to get bolted on. So the reason that I have decided to go with a different water pump is because of the fact that what I need for my turbo setup is a water feed and a water return. And so what I'm going to be doing is the block, some of these blocks like the K24 Z3, I believe, and some of the K20 blocks as well, actually have a built-in oil cooler from the factory. And so you've got a water supply that comes out of, inside your crankcase where your coolant goes. So your coolant would normally route to that supply and then actually return back to the front of your water pump. Now, the K24A2 is not a block that normally comes with that option. So the water pump that goes on the front is actually different. So I'll show you the difference between the two. This is a US spec K20A2, I believe. There's like a K20A2 and a K20Z3, I believe, that both have this little port right here where my thumb is. Now this is a water return back to the housing. And so if we look at the stock JDM water pump that I got, and the water pump housing, of course, we'll see that this does not have that water return, and it also has a big piece up here for where all of the JDM accessories mount onto. And so one of the reasons why changing this housing is so important is so that I can run the US accessories, so that I don't have to worry about like trying to source a Japanese alternator or anything like that. I can just, go to AutoZone, pick one up and be done with it. And so the reason that I couldn't just change out the front piece, like the actual water pump itself, is because of the fact that the mounting positions, all these bolts that mount the pump onto the housing, are not the same between this water pump and my new one. So I pretty much had to get an entire new housing to go with it. I bought that off eBay for, I don't know, about $100. And so fortunately the housings have the exact same design and the exact same shape, so that new one will pretty much bolt straight on. And so what I'm going to try to show you guys, it may not look like it, but this has actually been cleaned up quite a lot. And so because there is no gasket for this water pump housing, I'm actually going to need to use a gasket maker, such as a Honda Bond, or in my case, I'm going to be using this Permatex Ultra Black gasket maker. It's the same stuff that I used for the oil pan as well as the timing cover. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go ahead and get this applied all the way around the surface here, so that whenever I go to put the new water pump on here, it will all be flat and nice and sealed properly. And so this is how I've laid my bead. I've got one continuous string and goes all the way down and around and back up everywhere where it is supposed to be. So now, while this is still wet, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my new water pump housing and water pump itself, throw it on there, and then just kind of finger tighten it until all of this stuff starts to squeeze out the sides, and then I'll kind of clean it up a little bit on the outside. But then you wanna let it sit and cure for, it says an hour, but I don't really wanna have to wait that long, so I might not give it an hour. I might give it about 30 minutes until, you torque it down to spec. So let's get this thing bolted on. I'm gonna bring it up just until it kind of touches there. I don't want to jam it on. Now I'm gonna grab my hardware. Put these in. Like you guys saw, I've just got these basically finger tight and tightened down a little bit more with the torque wrench just to make sure that it's kind of getting that seal pressed in there, but you know, not completely torqued down to spec or anything yet. I'm gonna give this maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45. Basically just means I'm kind of sitting around. I can't really bolt on the alternator or the AC compressor. I might be able to do the my tensioner pulley here actually, because I don't think that's gonna get in the way of these. But other than that, I'm pretty much just gonna kind of be sitting here twiddling my thumbs and having a beer. It's an amazingly beautiful day. It's like 78, maybe about 80 by now. It's warmed up a little bit, but yeah, I'm looking forward to sitting by the pool once this job is done and having a couple of these. So koozie provided by K-Power Industries. Huge thanks to them for developing the whole swap kit, for going through the R&D and doing all of the work ahead of time to make this kind of a swap easier and just possible in general for enthusiasts like myself. So cheers to K-Power. Thank you guys. You guys are the best. So it's been about 20 minutes that this thing has been sitting. So we're gonna continue to give it some more time. You're basically just waiting for that gasket maker to solidify into a gasket before you completely squeeze it all the way down. We're gonna give that a little bit more time to solidify. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get my new tensioner pulley put on, and I had to get all new hardware from the Honda manufacturer because of the fact that all of the accessories, the JDM accessories that came on the engine, have completely different hardware. And so I tried to salvage nuts and bolts where I could, but there's just some things that you gotta get new stuff for. So for this, we have 3 different bolts. They're all M8 125, but the center one is longer. It's about 75 mil in length because of the fact that it has to go through the entire thickness of this to get to the top mounting spot on our new water pumps. Actually, springtime. So something else I just thought about that we can actually do while we're waiting for the water pump gasket maker to solidify is actually go ahead and get our main pulley put back on here. Now, you can buy a new one of these. You can buy the super expensive fluid damper version, which is like basically a solid piece, and everybody kind of swears by that for, you know, high performance stuff. But just that pulley I think is like $450 or $500, so I didn't really think it was necessary. So I'm just gonna reuse the old one that I had because of the fact that it's still in really good condition. It doesn't have any rust on it. It still looks pretty good. So we're gonna go ahead and get this thing thrown back on here. The problem that I ran into, however, is that the oil return fitting that I have for my timing cover it sits too far out. It's actually making contact with that pulley. And I'll show you what I mean. So this super nice CNC'd aluminum oil return that I got from Pro Series Fabrication, shout out to them, is a really nice piece, and I really want to run this. And so what this is intended to do, so this is your timing chain tensioner behind your timing cover. And so what this does, since oil runs all throughout this, what this is supposed to allow you to do is to route your turbo oil return back to this instead of having to like drill and tap a fitting into your oil pan itself. So this was just going to be an easy kind of bolt-on solution. Okay, so that's just loosely mounted there. So now if I go to take my crank pulley and put this on, not necessarily in the right orientation or anything, but just to make sure that it slides all the way to the back and it's sitting in the right place. With that fitting in place and with my pulley on, you can actually see right there in this little corner, the front pulley is actually making contact with this, and it's not able to sit as far back as it should. So the gap between the edge of this and the timing cover without that in place is about 9 millimeters. And with this in place, it's only able to seat back about 12 millimeters. And all that basically means is that this is stopping the pulley from sitting flush. And so if I was to try and bolt this in, screw it down whenever I go to start up the engine, whenever that is, in another 11 months, because I'm going super slow on this build unnecessarily, when I go to start this up, this is gonna start wearing away this section on this piece. Now, is that necessarily the end of the world? Not really. I mean, obviously I don't want things like making contact and rubbing and grinding themselves down, but you know, this will still be able to turn, and it'll still turn all the pulleys. Like it'll force itself to turn against that. But I don't want that to happen, so I've got to figure out what to do with that. I could just put the stock Skunk 2 timing cover back on, and then this would sit flush with no problem, but then I have to find a new way for my oil drain to work. I'd probably have to drill and either tap, which I probably wouldn't want to tap it because it's oil. I'd probably need to weld in a return fitting into the oil pan right here so the oil can drain out of the turbo and then down to here instead of draining to this piece. But I really like this piece. It's a really slick, you know, it kind of stands out from the front. You know, it's like an accent piece versus the whole solid black, whereas this would just kind of, you know, fill that cover. I like that piece. I want to use that piece. So I've got to figure out what I'm gonna do with that. I am kind of thinking about if I have the option to cut this fitting or grind down this fitting to make it to, you know, open up some space to let this guy sit flat and not have any interference there. I really don't want to have to do that, but it also comes down to how much material do I have on that you know, CNC aluminum piece. You know, how much space do I have right here that I would actually be able to work with? Like, how thick is this material so that I can actually, you know, cut back and grind and sand down the space that I need and not have it, you know, create any kind of leak behind this piece. So what I'm gonna do is take this off and start kind of looking at how thick this material is, which it is pretty thick. I mean, it's billet out of a solid piece of aluminum, but let's just take a look here. I'm gonna do some more thinking and see if I can't figure this out. I'm gonna move on. It has been about 45 minutes since the last update I gave, so this water pump should be ready to torque to spec, and then we can move on and we can start doing everything else. Let's get this baby torqued down. I was not able to find any information on what the torque specs for really any of these accessories are. I think I'm just gonna kind of fly by the size of the bolts that I've already done when doing the oil pan and all the timing cover and everything. So I believe that since these are 14 mil bolts, they are M12, and M12 bolts have typically been torqued to like 25 foot-pounds. So I think that's what I'm gonna go with for now, and we're just gonna kind of see how it plays out. Yeah, and then I'm going to do 20 foot-pounds for all of the 3 bolts that are holding on my tensioner. So now that those are done, we are pretty much ready to get our alternator bolted on, which is gonna go right here. We've got 2 bolts at the bottom and then one really long one that goes through the top. And so all of the accessories that I have new versions of, I'm gonna have links down in the description if you guys wanna check those out. They're from Rock Auto. It's not a sponsored or an affiliate link of any kind, just if you wanna find them, there's a quick resource so that you can identify them. Little ledge that we can kind of use for support while we're getting these threaded up here. I think that's got it. You're f***ing kidding. I did not just strip that. You guys ever have a bolt go from tight, you know, tight, and and then it kind of lurches and it goes loose. Yeah, that's what just happened with this one of these bottom bolts. So I'm just gonna kind of leave that there. That's probably just like ate a thread, like crossed a thread, which is really unfortunate. I'm hoping that's gonna be okay. I really don't know, and there's not really much that I want to do about it at the moment. I'm genuinely afraid to strip any more threads because I've already done that on a couple of different things, a couple of different times. I'm just gonna go with like 10 foot-pounds on all 12 mil bolts from here on out. Now, AC compressor is next. This is actually going to mount right below the alternator. It's gonna go basically right here-ish. And so this actually has some kind of hooks on the tops where it mounts onto the water pump. But so yeah, the top 2 bolts go in the water pump, and then the bottom 2 bolts go into this bracket. I'm gonna kind of get this using the hooks that are on here. I'm gonna get that kind of hung up there in place so I can go hands off and then try and get these bolts threaded in. And there you go. That's just about everything bolted on. One thing I do want to explain, something that I did while I was after I had kind of fooled around with this crank pulley and this issue. You know, I still needed to wait for the water pump to kind of finish up. So what I did was I went ahead and I got the coolant neck installed. Now this is a little bit tricky, and I'll explain what I did as I didn't really film it while I was doing it. So the reason that you need a new one of these is that, first of all, this engine is normally mounted sideways inside the engine bay versus longitudinally. And so the coolant neck is massive. This is the stock coolant neck that went and connected on here. As you can see, that's one, it's dirty and looks like trash, but 2, it's way too big and doesn't really get the job done. So that is where the K-Power coolant neck comes in. And so what it does is actually relocates the coolant temperature sensor. So normally that goes right here. So this is just a 17 mil size. You just unscrew from there and you screw it into the top, and then they give you this bolt with an O-ring to get mounted into there. It doesn't make any kind of contact here, but so it just blocks off that port because it's not really necessary anymore. And so one of the things that I actually had to do is that previously this had 2 studs in place of 2 holes for where bolts could get threaded in. And so there were 2 of these. These were already, you know, threaded into the side of the block, and so it was intended to just have a, you know, this, you'd install your water neck on one side, and then you would just have a threaded nut that would go on the outside. So what I had to do was actually thread on 2 bolts. If we want to focus, hello. Yeah, so I took 2 of these flange style bolts and I threaded them on together and I torqued them down. I had 2 12mm wrenches on each of these bolts and torqued them to tighten so that they basically lock themselves together. And then, you know, so this is installed in here. And then once these 2 are connected, you can just twist the inner one as if you're trying to loosen a bolt, and it'll actually loosen the threads on this stud and you can pull this out completely. And so with those out of the way, I had room to get the 2 bolts in the top and then the 2 bolts in the bottom, and then basically just, you know, reattach my coolant temperature sensor from that I had already removed, just screw it in right here, tighten it down, and you're pretty much good to go. So as far as accessories go, we are more or less dialed. It's looking more and more like a complete engine. Really, the only thing that it's missing now, obviously, is my crank pulley back on here, but yeah, I'm gonna have to figure this out in the next video, which is going to be all of the turbo stuff getting figured out, all of the fittings, all of the lines. You know, I'm gonna have either -4 or -6 AN lines to supply and return both coolant and oil, but I've got to get that figured out. You know, got to get all that stuff ordered, and I need some sort of adapter to go from like a -4 or a -6 to this -10. if I even end up using this. And so I'm gonna take some time and try and figure out what I'm gonna do with this. I very well might just kind of cut down some of this material as long as I'm not breaching through to the other side. And if I do breach through to the other side, you know, I have a TIG welder that I can use to, you know, patch that back up to make sure that we're not gonna be, you know, blowing oil out the front of this here. But, you know, obviously I can't have this causing rubbing on the crank pulley. So anyway, that's pretty much gonna wrap it up for today. I was really hoping to have the crank pulley on there and put the belt on and call it a day and say, check, that's done. All I have to do is figure the turbo. But in the next video, we're gonna cover all of that. And then once all of our lines are installed, this engine is pretty much ready to drop into the car. So over the next few weeks, I'm gonna have a couple more videos coming out on getting this thing finished and buttoned up and ready to go in. And then obviously pulling the stock engine. And there's gonna be some engine bay prep that goes into this. There's gonna be some, you know, maneuvering of lines. I'm gonna have to clear the transmission tunnel at some point to get the CD009 to fit. But, you know, we'll worry about that when we get there. I hope you guys found this video enjoyable. I hope that you found it helpful. If you are viewing this as kind of a step-by-step guide, that's kind of how I'm trying to make it. So if you did enjoy it, please leave it a thumbs up down below. It really, really helps the channel grow, really helps exposure, as well as boost that algorithm. And if you are new to the channel and if you want to follow the build and see this thing go in and see it run in however many more months it takes me to finish this, I would really, really appreciate it if you guys would subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on when everything comes out. And until next time, build your dreams. My nose is running like a horse on race days.